Welcome, everybody. Thanks for those joining live here with us this evening in support of our DIGA694 Capstone research presentations. Tonight, we're featuring Jim Gloor and Erik Allard. We'll be sharing a little bit more about what it was their research uncovered. So it's pretty cool. This particular semester, we have two really great capstones that are focusing on archaeology and really a technology-infused history experience and working with various types of technology, data, and prediction. So we'll learn a little bit more about their topics here coming up as well. But I did want to share with everybody joining in both live here tonight and for folks who may be watching this later, that this is an opportunity in our capstone research where both Jim and Erik are at the conclusion of their academic tenure here and will soon or shortly be graduating. And the purpose of our opportunity tonight with these presentations are to engage discussion with those of you to help look for opportunities that the projects may be enhanced or just taking really suggestions and bringing that in so that we can use, or both Jim and Erik can use those suggestions to help improve any small final details or contributions in their paper over the next few weeks. So that is the idea. We're working on wrapping up the papers, but they're maybe not 100% complete yet. So this is really an opportunity to get some final thoughts and check-in comments, suggestions, things like that. So that's where we're going, the purpose of our presentations here this evening. So myself, just as a couple brief introductions from our core staff and our presenters here. My name is John Ebert. I'm a faculty member and director of the Data Intelligence and GeoAnalytics program. So again, I thank everyone for joining in here this evening and later online in support of both Jim and Erik. And also joining us tonight is our another full-time faculty member in the department, Greta Poser. Greta, if you wanted to share a few words or not. Okay.
Good to be here. Looking forward to the presentations.
Yeah, no, it's great to see you here too. Jim, would you care to share just a bit about you? Jim Gloor is one of he actually is our first presenter here this evening, but just a short overview. Welcome there, Jim, from you.
Yeah, I'm been interested in archaeology since I retired some years ago and got involved with the Archaeological Society of Virginia and participated in their certification program, be certified as an archaeology technician. And I've worked on several projects in Virginia in archaeology over the last few years. And I've always been struck by how I needed more information on how to map. Mapping is such an important part of archaeology, and I just didn't really feel like I had the capabilities that I needed. And I found this program. I talked with some people at Mayo that work in their geospatial information service there, and they suggested this program. And I think maybe a year and a half after that first contact, signed up for it. It's been really a pretty wonderful way to spend. The pandemic would have been so awful, just being so isolated, but having this particular program to participate in has been a really good way to pass the time for sure. And I'm really excited to get back out into the field and actually put this to work. I'm excited about it.
Thank you very much, Jim. And our second presenter this evening is Erik Allard. And Erik, just to share a few thoughts or comments here, introduction about you.
My name is Erik. I got my bachelor's degree in history, so this topic was kind of natural for me to gravitate towards. As much as I've enjoyed the program, I'm ready to wrap things up finally.
I think that's the typical sentiment, Erik, when all of our folks reach this pinnacle at the top of the iceberg here, we're ready to get on and go do something, some other cool things with this. So Thank you both for your warm introductions there. So with that, we'll go ahead and introduce Jim's topic a bit. And actually, we may just pause for a moment here. I did list on the agenda 5:15 for a start time for you, Jim, just in case there are any late ads here. So I'm just going to pause the recording for a few moments and give anybody who might be joining in the next few moments here an opportunity to hop in before you start. All right, everyone, I'd like to welcome Jim Gloor. He will be our first presenter sharing his capstone research this evening. The title of Jim's work is Characterization of Archaic and Woodland Period Prehistoric Coastal Plain Archaeological Sites in Gloucester County, Virginia, a geospatial analysis. So it's a mouthful there, Jim, but you did a remarkable job on this. So Jim, if you care to share your screen out, we can go ahead and turn the floor over to you to share your findings and learn a bit more about what you were able to find. So Jim, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, John. I have a map of Virginia on this slide, the upper right-hand corner. Gloucester County is shown in bright red, and it's located in one of the 5 geophysical provinces of Virginia, the coastal plain, which is highlighted in pink. Virginia has a rich historic culture, rich prehistoric culture with 24,000 sites registered by the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, the VDHR. And Gloucester County shares that history. It has nearly 200 sites registered with VDHR. And just as a point of interest for people not from Virginia, the Gloucester County includes the prehistoric site Werowocomoco. We're all familiar with the story of Pocahontas and John Smith and her father Powhatan. The picture in the middle of this slide is an artist's rendition of what Werowocomoco must have looked like. And to the right of that is an aerial photo, shows the actual site of the town where Pocahontas saved John Smith's life, which that's kind of a fascinating point to me. My project involves 2 different temporal periods, the Archaic period, which runs from 10,000 BC to 1100 BC. This was a time period characterized by a hunter-gatherer lifeway consisting of microbands of 25 to 50 people who would live initially in the uplands. They would seasonally gather to take advantage of seasonal resources by combining into larger macro bands of 1 to 200 people. As I say, this was initially in the uplands, but it transitioned by the end of the period to become a more riverine coastal focus. Characteristics of the woodland period, which followed the Archaic period, running from 1100 BC to 1600 AD, at the time of the arrival of European colonists to Virginia. This was a more sedentary lifestyle with a long-term riverine focus. The woodland period has 3 defining characteristics. One was the initiation of the bow and arrow replacing the previously used throwing sticks called atlatls. Agriculture, horticulture began at that time initially with corn and later with beans and squash. And finally, the manufacture and use of ceramics began during the woodland period. The purpose of this project was to compare Archaic and woodland period archaeological sites in terms of 4 geospatial attributes. Those include elevation, slope, distance to rivers, and distance to wetlands, such as marshes and bogs and swamps. I'll compare the Archaic and woodland period site attributes, and I developed models to predict location of prehistoric sites. I had 3 data sources for this project. The first was the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, or the VDHR, that provided site information, such as identification numbers, the temporal period to which it belonged, and latitude and longitude. The United States Geologic Survey Earth Explorer app provided a digital elevation map that I could use. And then the National Hydrography Dataset provided information on water bodies. I got site information from the VDHR, created feature classes, including site identification, time period, latitude and longitude, and created two feature classes. One was for the archaic sites shown in the middle, with sites shown as red circles. The black outline corresponds with the border of Gloucester County. The second feature class consisted of 127 woodland sites. Again, those sites are shown as red dots within the boundaries of Gloucester County. The USGS digital elevation map is shown in the left with Gloucester County outlined in white. That digital elevation model was used to create elevation raster shown in the middle and a slope raster showing Gloucester County slope on the right. The USGS National Hydrography Dataset provided data that I used to create feature classes for rivers and wetlands, and then used those feature classes to create rasters for Euclidean distance to rivers and wetlands. The next step of my analysis was to create histograms and Boolean rasters. The histogram in the middle on the top corresponds with the distribution of archaic sites, archaeological sites, in relation to their elevation above sea level. You can see there's this threshold such that 35 of the 39 archaic sites, or 90% of them, were located at an elevation of less than or equal to 14 feet above sea level. So I used that information to create a Boolean raster shown in the upper right, where pixels with elevation less than or equal to 14 feet above sea level are scored 1 and displayed as blue. Pixels that are greater than 14 feet are scored 0 and displayed as gray. Similarly, in the archaic slope histogram that's shown in the bottom there, 37 of 39 sites were located on terrain that had a slope of less than or equal to 1.6 degrees. And I used that information to create a Boolean raster that's shown in green, where pixels with slope less than or equal to 1.6 degrees are scored 1 and displayed in green, and pixels with greater degrees of slope were scored as 0 and shown in gray. I did the same thing with archaic site distance to rivers and distance to wetlands. Distance to rivers showed that 67%, 26 of the 39 archaic sites were located within 1,000 feet of a river. And I used that data to create the raster, the red and gray raster in the upper right, where distance less than or equal to 1,000 feet from a river was scored as 1 and displayed in red, and pixels that were greater than that 1,000 feet were scored 0 and displayed in gray. And then I did the same thing with distance to wetlands. 80% of archaic sites are located less than or equal to 1,400 feet from wetlands, swamps, and marshes and bogs. And I created that Boolean raster with the display in orange in the lower right-hand corner. The next step was to do a Boolean overlay of those Boolean rasters to create a summative composite raster, classifying the terrain of Gloucester County based on its probability of being found to contain a prehistoric site. In this model, there were 3 criteria. This isn't just an illustrative model, an example. There were 3 criteria used in this model: elevation less than or equal to 14 feet, shown in blue; slope less than or equal to 1.6 degrees, shown in green; and distance to rivers and streams less than 1,000 feet, shown in red. When I overlay those Boolean rasters, I get this composite raster in which pixels in which all three criteria are fulfilled are scored high probability and are displayed as dark green. Pixels that have two of the criteria fulfilled are listed as classified as intermediate probability and are displayed in light green. Pixels that have only one of those three criteria fulfilled were scored as low probability and displayed in orange. And those pixels that had no criteria fulfilled were considered to be very low probability and were displayed in red. The first part of my analysis was a comparison of the site attributes of Archaic and Woodland period. I used a two-tailed t-test of means to compare those. The attribute names are listed in the header columns: elevation, slope, distance to rivers, and distance to wetlands. The data itself is shown in this red box. It's a little difficult because there's lots of numbers, lots of small numbers in many columns and many rows. But the important point of that is that there was really no significant difference demonstrated between elevation, slope, distance to water for Archaic and Woodland period sites. The p-value was greater than 0.05. So my first finding was that really I could not, based on these criteria, I couldn't distinguish a significant difference between the way Archaic and Woodland sites behaved. The next step was an assessment of the performance of site location models. I did this using the Kvamme gain statistic. This is a tool that yields a numeric score. That tool is based on accuracy and precision. Accuracy in this archaeological model, accuracy is defined as based on the proportion of archaeological sites captured in the model. Precision relates more to how much of the area of investigation has been classified as high probability. Just to use an example, you could catch 100% of the sites if you chose, for the precision, if you chose 100% of the area, you would have 100% of the sites. It wouldn't be a very useful model, but it's an illustration of how the accuracy and precision work together. This is the formula itself for the Kvamme gain statistic. We start with the proportion of the area of investigation that our Boolean overlay model, composite raster model, says is high probability of containing sites. Divide that by the proportion of sites that are located within that area and take that value and subtract it from 1. A Kvamme gain score greater than 0.5 is the performance that you get with chance. So anything greater than 0.5 corresponds to a gain, to a benefit over what you would get with just chance. This busy slide shows 4 models that I constructed looking at Archaic period site models. You can look at the characteristics of the model, the criteria of the model in the left column. Elevation and slope were held constant in these models, with elevation less than or equal to 14 feet above sea level, slope less than or equal to 1.6 degrees, and then distance from river was tested at 500-foot intervals, ranging from 500 feet to 2,000 feet. So I have 4 different models here. You can see that as the distance from river increases from 500 feet to 2,000 feet, the area that the model scores as high probability increases from 18% of the total area to 29% of the area. At the same time, you can see that as the area increases, so does the percent of sites, of Archaic sites that are captured in the model, increasing from 50% to 80%. When we plug those values into the Kvamme gain formula, we come up with a KG score that is highly significant, or it indicates good performance, with a score of 0.64 to 0.65. Remember, 0.5 corresponds with the results that you would get purely with chance. So this shows a significant benefit, a significant gain by this model. at multiple different distances, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 feet. All of these models give good performance. So this is just a little bit easier to see what I'm talking about. This is a model of archaic sites with elevation less than or equal to 14 feet, slope less than or equal to 1.6 degrees, and distance from rivers less than or equal to 1,000 feet. This model classifies 23% of the total area as high probability, and it's displayed in dark green. 25 of 39 sites, 64% of the sites that were captured in high probability areas, and those are shown in the black circles. So when I plug 23% divided by 64%, subtract that value from 1, that's where I get my Kvamme gain score of 0.64. So instead of distance to rivers, if I use the distance from wetlands criterion, I find that the mean Kvamme gain score using that is less than 0.5, suggesting that the site models that incorporate distance from wetlands as one of the criteria are not predictive. Moving to the woodland period sites, again, I held elevation and slope constant, but based on the histograms for the woodland period, I chose the elevation of less than or equal to 15 feet above sea level, slope less than or equal to 1.6 degrees, and then distance from rivers tested at 500-foot intervals again. And you can see that, again, this is basically the same model, that as the distance from rivers increases, the percent of area classified as high probability of containing a site increases from 18 to 30%. As that area increases, so does the percent of sites that are captured by the model, increasing from 54% to 77%. The Kvamme gain score that the formula yields shows that this is similar to the archaic period models. The woodland period models are also quite well performing at 0.64 to 0.67. This is a series of woodland sites using that model that I described, the elevation less than or equal to 15 feet above sea level, the slope less than or equal to 1.6, and distance from rivers at 1,000 feet. 23% of the areas with that were classified as high probability, again shown in dark green. 89 of the 127 sites, 70% of the sites, were captured in those high probability areas, giving a Kvamme gain of 0.67, indicating that this is a well-functioning model. Similar to the archaic sites, the distance to wetlands was not particularly well performing with Kvamme score gain, a Kvamme gain score of essentially 0.5. So models based on distance to wetlands really didn't perform well, in contrast to the models based on distance to rivers. So a discussion of my results here. The first thing is that really there was no difference in the site attributes, geospatial attributes, between archaic and woodland periods. And I would attribute that to the fact that the majority of the archaic sites, 29 of the 39 archaic sites, were also contained components of the woodland period. So they were classified as both archaic sites as well as woodland sites. I have a Venn diagram showing that, and you can see that the large majority of the archaic sites were also classified as woodland. So it makes sense that you'd really not find much of a difference between the attributes between archaic and woodland periods. The second observation was that the distance to wetlands, you can see here on the map is shown in dark blue. Distance to wetlands models had a very poor performance, with KG scores generally less than 0.5. In contrast, the models that incorporated distance to rivers, shown in light blue, was highly predictive at 0.65. You can kind of see that if you just look at the map, this red oval, look how many of the sites it captures that are close to the light blue York River. So it's easy to see that there's a real tendency for sites to be located within a close distance to the rivers. There are really big limitations to this study that need to be acknowledged. One is the actual impact of these attributes is likely limited. And that's partially because Gloucester County has got such uniform terrain. When you look at the slopes, 1.6 degrees how would you know the difference between 2 degrees and 1.6 degrees? I mean, statistically, that's what the data show, but that amount of difference in slope is really, really minimal. The maximum slope in this area was 7 degrees. The other thing that needs to be really emphasized is that the decision on where to place your site was based on many non-measurable attributes. Proximity to seasonally harvested resources, for example, or a history of prior use by a particular group of people. They've decided that this is a nice place for us to stay, we'll go back there. So there are many non-measurable attributes that go into where these sites were located. And you can't minimize the fact that social and cultural influences are really difficult to assess at this distance in time and place. My conclusion is that geospatial analysis really is an important component of archaeological investigations. And that while this current project had kind of limited scope for the reasons I discussed, it shows the power of the tools. These tools can be applied to multiple other areas, both in Virginia and elsewhere. And I think that application of this approach is likely to provide really important information regarding prehistoric lifeways and culture. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate you sharing all the fun things that you were able to learn through the process here. But at this point, I would like to offer the floor up to, if you just leave your screen up there, Jim, and
okay.
if someone wants to refer to any illustrations or diagrams or things of that nature. If anyone would have any general questions at this point for Jim regarding data, methods, findings?
Yes, I do have a question. Yeah.
Go ahead, Jonas.
Yeah, hi, Jim.
Hello, Jonas.
Yeah, thank you for your help for assignment 3.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. And I mean, the question I have is, I mean, you said, you said like one slide, there is no difference between the woodland sites and archaic site. I mean, how did you measure the difference between those two?
I did a two-tailed t-test of the means of elevation for the archaic sites, elevation or slope of the archaic and woodland sites, the distance from water where those sites were located. And I took the means of those attributes and did a two-tailed t-test. And it didn't look to be statistically significantly different.
Oh, okay.
That to the fact that most of the archaic sites were also woodland sites. So that would tend to minimize any differences that you might see. Because there were difference in lifeways between the archaic and the woodland period. And I think we had a big enough group that you could take sites that were exclusively archaic and compare those to sites that are exclusively woodland period, maybe you would see a difference. But since they're mixed together, it kind of makes the difference much less apparent. And they were really relatively small numbers.
Oh, so they're almost close.
I have a question or a comment, if I can.
Yes, Mike.
Hey, I really like it, and I think it's going to be extremely useful when you get yourself here to Virginia soon. But you know, I have more than 50 counties that I cover, so you've got a lot more work to do. And not all are in the Tidewater, as you know, and in the Piedmont and in the more toward the Blue Ridge. I'm wondering how this is going to play out, and maybe you've thought about it, where woodland and archaic sites might not always mesh up so well. And I think the slope is going to make a big difference there in dividing those. And I'm sure you've thought about that.
Yeah, that I think will make a big difference. And the other thing is that the county borders are manufactured by
Yeah.
non-native people. And so looking at patterns that correspond to watersheds and things of that nature may be another way that things can be refined a little bit. And I forgot to say, I need to say this, Hayden Bassett, who's listening to this, was extremely helpful to me in working through some of these things. He's kind of the pioneer of this in Virginia and has looked at other sites in Western Virginia where the slopes are a lot bigger.
Yeah, yeah, and less general wetlands to contend with, more riverine and less, sort of swampy areas as in the Tidewater. So it may make a difference. And I wonder if something like the clay sources might be a factor for some of those sites that don't really quite fit the model, that they're there for, like you said, a different reason, not necessarily the same resources, but there for a very specific resource. So really fascinating work. Thanks, Jim.
I looked at that soil survey site and pulled out the different soil types, and the map that is available that I pulled away from, I think it's Department of Agriculture. I don't know who does that. I'd be able to get to that site. Very complex map showing lots and lots of different types of soil, but many of them are just subsets of one particular type. Yeah. So you could lump very nicely to answer that very question. Does soil type have any bearing on site characteristics or frequency of sites? Are there particularly, in the woodland period after agriculture became more of a concern, is that reflected in the different soil types?
Right, agriculture and pottery, yeah.
That data is readily available. I just haven't analyzed it.
Yeah, well, really great. Thank you, Jim.
Hey, Jim, this is Hayden Bassett here. I've got a question for you.
Yes.
So you and I have talked extensively about the technical side of this type of work, but I had a question more on the sort of maybe the stakeholder side is a good way of calling it. So, archaeologists are clearly the one of the main benefactors of your work here, but predictive modeling of archaeological sites has a ton of utility outside of archaeology. And I was just wondering who do you think might be some of the non-archaeological stakeholders that might benefit from this type of work or seeing these sort of predictive values laid out in the way that you have?
Boy, that's a great question. I think that at a very basic level, the first thing I would do would be see if I could find a feature that was a point feature, multiple point features, and then use those with more polygonal type things where you'd be finding, well, like I mentioned, the topographic area, the different soil types. I know that in the Midwest here, agriculture is a huge beneficiary of ArcGIS, and I'm not qualified at all to really talk much about it, but the resources available for farmers to use this technology to optimize crop management, soil modification, what crop to plant, things of that nature. Looking
And I'm
for
thinking,
areas.
sorry to cut you off, and I was thinking more of, maybe in Gloucester County, who are some of the groups that might benefit from the data products that you've produced, whether it's, specific, government related, positions that need like planners, maybe specific native groups, what are your thoughts along those lines?
One thought that just comes to me that really would be something really interesting is in recent years, the documentation of African-American cemeteries has become a very important, as I'm telling someone that knows this way better than I do, but locations of African-American cemeteries has become a very important part of the importance has been recognized in recent years. And this type of technology where you can localize, you can maybe even use it in prediction of where you might expect to find an increased density of African-American cemeteries. So that's one group of stakeholders that I could imagine might lend itself to this type of a thing.
Hayden, if I could hop on there and help with support of Jim's commentary there too. Oftentimes what I've seen with my background in resource management and whatnot, a lot of these predictive models that are generated out of really, really good data sets, I think have a lot of promise in engaging different stakeholders with, as you mentioned, planning departments, DOT, transportation networks, as a means of identifying, I would call them potentially, I was just saying, like the probability of a high risk cultural site, if there was some type of a major soil disturbance operation going on, a new road or whatever going through a particular area. I think in looking at Jim's model, having that data available could really maybe give some insight into, okay, we're looking at more of a high risk area here in terms of cultural disturbances as opposed to another. I'm not sure if that's kind of the direction you're asking there, Hayden. And
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think there's some good possibilities of engaging those type of state construction, companies, real estate, like I said, DOT, those areas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Other questions, comments for Jim?
I've got one, if that's all right.
Yeah, please.
Jim, I know you've got a fairly robust sample based on the majority of counties in at least Eastern Virginia that I've studied. And at the same time, I know more data typically excites and requires a certain amount of openness to seeing how data changes. And we all ultimately find some flaws with the data sets that we have. So do you think it takes another 100 sites, another 200 sites, maybe a refinement of the data to re-examine this? Is this something that should be done every 5 years, every 10 years? With the changing way that we look at these predictive models and often the questions reflecting our current needs, how do you see this kind of study being the launching off point for continued studies in localities as a tool for all of those interested parties?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it previously. Counties are kind of an artificial entity to some degree. It's kind of how data is recorded, but I think going to more geographical or geological boundaries might be a useful exercise. Watersheds is the thing that comes to mind, or things like that. I think that this particular study, I don't know that prehistoric sites are being registered so many per year that it's going to need to be repeating this analysis. Now, enriching this analysis, I think the issue of looking at soil types, roping in some of that soil survey data and see if that has an impact. That might be an interesting way to expand this. But I would look at it from two standpoints: increasing and refining the attributes that you're studying and adjusting your boundaries to reflect geographical boundaries rather than political boundaries.
Thank you.
David.
Thank you, Dave. Other questions? Jim knows I have about 100 for him. May not get through all of those this evening here, but other questions, comments for Jim?
Just curious, do you recall what the resolution of the elevation data was?
I'm sorry?
Do you recall what the resolution of the elevation data, of the elevation raster? Like if it was a 30 meter or 10 meter?
I can't tell you right this instant, but I have that. I don't know.
That's fine. I was just,
Lived in multiple different places, but can't tell you right now.
that's fine. I was just, when you're talking about the size of these sites, sorry, my dog is.
1 arc-second, Greta, it's 1 arc-second resolution.
Okay. I was curious about if, because I think usually when we look at elevation of a site, we look at just at that XY coordinate. If it would be interesting to look at the surrounding area, like if, I don't know how big those sites are, but if they covered like a, 500 square meters or
I
a
see.
kilometer, if you looked at the elevation of the entire area.
What I have here for this map, the entire thing, which is greater than Gloucester County, it talks about 1 arc-second resolution, global coverage, coordinates 37 minus 77. I don't know if that'd be, I suppose, the latitude and longitude.
Okay, so probably a pretty large cell size then. So you're probably capturing a good average of the site. That's probably good. Sometimes I wonder, like when we get into really high resolution data where you're looking at like a square meter, is the elevation at that particular square meter tell the whole story of the area or not? But it sounds like your cell size was probably fairly appropriate for the study area. It's good. It's really interesting. I enjoyed listening.
Thank you, Greta.
And that's a great point that Ms. Poser brings up about the granularity of our data, and understanding how our input data is going to generate an output and how we can make some inferences, or what inferences are we making off of input data sets and those resolutions. So that's a really great and good consideration. Jim, we can visit more about that, in your paper and how we might make inferences off of that. Jim, as we wrap up here, I'll have a number of questions here that I'll save for you on the end of things here after the presentation. In the journey of the research process for you, I know that you undertook a lot of endeavors to jump through many different hurdles, and I was wondering if you could share with us what that research process meant to you, and what were you able to take away from this whole process from beginning to end now that you've reached the end of that journey?
Well, I would have to say that it was just an amazing accident, a horrible accident, but an amazing accident that this took place during the pandemic time, because it gave me opportunities to just plug in and study this stuff that otherwise I might not have had. The amount that I feel like I've learned is just astounding. One of the characteristics of this program is that it, on purpose, exposes you to many different things that you don't go too deep into, but you know what you've been exposed to. and that it will prepare you for digging into those things in the future if you happen to need to. I was thinking just the other day that in some ways this is very similar to medical school, where you go through medical school and you graduate from medical school and you're a doctor, but you don't really know all that much in terms of practically how do you put this stuff to use. After having graduated from this program, I think now I'm ready to start learning stuff, small little niche in much greater detail, not so much covering the waterfront in a very shallow level, which is appropriate for this program. But actually now I'll be able to go and really dig into the areas that are particularly pertinent to my interests.
And thank you, Jim. That journey was very rich with our gain statistic, and excuse me, researching that. So with that, I guess any other concluding remarks that anyone might have? Otherwise, we will congratulate Jim here and move into a brief intermission before we move in to our second presenter, Erik.
I'll go.
Go ahead, Jim.
I'll stop screen share.
Sure. Okay. Well, Jim, on behalf of our faculty at St. Mary's and the rest of our folks joining us live here this evening, we'd like to thank you and congratulate you on the work that you have been making in progress to the conclusion and closure of your Master of Science, Data Intelligence and GeoAnalytics. So thank you, Jim. We're all giving you a big round of applause here for you. So I'm probably the only one that people can hear right now clapping. There, Dave was hollering there too. So Jim, congratulations to you. And I'll stop recording here and take a brief pause before we move into Erik's presentation. Welcome back, everyone. We're just returning back from a short break. And we're now at the time we'd like to introduce our second presenter of the evening, Erik Allard. Erik will share a similar type of study, and that's what's really neat about this particular capstone experience this semester is that we have two capstones, but in a collegial way, they're very enriching and supporting of each other in that they're both dealing with archaeology. And it doesn't happen too often where we have several capstone research projects that both are focusing on similar but yet very different approaches to analyzing data. And so I found this really, really exciting to see the combination of both your work. So Erik, we'll turn it over to you here. And the title of Erik's work is an exploration of predictive archaeological models for early Icelandic settlements. And so Erik, we'll go ahead and have you share your screen and with that your presentation. And then we'll go ahead and turn it over to you to let you highlight and share with us many of the things that you found in your research this semester and over the course of your capstone. So Erik.
Okay. So hi guys, like John said, I'm Erik, and this is my research project. A little background to Iceland is 600 miles northwest of Scotland and has about 40,000 square miles, a fifth of which are glaciers or volcanic rock because it's so far north, and it's also on the mid-Atlantic tectonic plates. And then it was discovered around the 860s AD, and then the first successful permanent settlement occurred in 874 AD. And the value of this project is to efficiently focus time and resources for archaeological purposes, and then provide increased insight and understanding of the past and history through possible discoveries and cultural preservation and land management. And then the purpose is to try to create a site suitability model of the early settlement of Iceland. So to begin with, I needed some, known sites to start building the model off of, and the best source that I came across was from the Cultural Heritage Agency of Iceland. They had a data set with protected sites and preserved archaeological sites, stuff like that. And so I pulled that and translated it into English, and then narrowed down the scope to the time period of interest of 1200 AD, and narrowed down the type of archaeological artifacts to human settlements such as farms and refuse pits. And this left me with 189 historic sites. After having the sites, I then ran a nearest neighbor analysis to establish whether they were randomly placed or clustered. If they were clustered, it would indicate that there were some factors that played a role in where they were selected. And with a z-score of negative 18.297, they were clustered. So after establishing that there were factors that influenced the site selection, I started looking at environmental variables that might have done that. And to begin with, I pulled 2-meter DEM data from the University of Minnesota Polar Geospatial Center. And I resized that to 10 meters to make it more manageable and to try to capture a good area. Like we briefly touched on in the break, making sure it's not too zoomed in. And then from this DEM layer, I used it for the variables of elevation, aspect, slope, 1 kilometer local relief, and the cost distance to fresh water, using the slope as the cost. And then due to a gap in the DEM coverage, one of the 189 sites had to be dropped, leaving me with 188. And these are the aspect, local relief, slope, and cost distance to water. So for the model type, instead of going with a Bayesian or AHP type, I sort of based my model off of 2 papers that I'd read while researching the predictive models. They were the use of predictive modeling to target Neolithic settlement and occupation activity in mainland Scotland by Dorothy Graves in 2010, and a predictive model for Mesolithic site location on Islay using logistic regression GIS by Patricia Woodman in 2000. So now that I was using a logistic regression for the model type, I needed non-sites to train where model to know that there weren't sites there. This was done by with creating random points in ArcGIS and extracting the variable layer values to those points. After which I combined the historical sites and the non-sites into a single spreadsheet file and brought that over into SPSS. After which I categorized the data to establish linearity. And using 3 categorical levels, I plotted the odds ratio. And the only linear variable was elevation. So that got returned to continuous data, while all the others were kept as categorical. Next, I looked at the relationship that the variables might have played on one another, looking for interaction and confounding variables, where the variables might kind of magnify their effect, sort of. And I did this by running a single variable model and then a paired variable model. And the elevation and slope were the only 2 confounding variables. So having established that the others were interacting, I created hybrid variables for them to use as well by multiplying the categorical variables together. And then I put all the variables and the created hybrid variables into a logistic regression in SPSS. And for variable selection, I used the backwards LR method. And working backwards, it includes all the variables and then starts working backwards, removing them to check for significance. This produced 6 models, which all proved statistically significant, but I used the second model, and this used all the standalone variables except for aspect and all the hybrid variables. And I chose the second one because it was tied the highest for the Nagelkirk R-square with 65% of the variance in the model explained, and 82.8% of the sites correctly predicted. Next, I reclassified the variable layers in ArcGIS to match the ranges of categorization, and I used Raster Calculator and Reclassify to create the hybrid layers as well. Then I used Raster Calculator to apply the return coefficients from the logistic regression to the appropriate variable layers. And then the result was normalized so that it was between 0 and 1. After that, I took an additional step of applying glacier coverage and setting that to 0 since you can't really settle on glaciers. And this is the result. And then for validation, I use the Kvamme gain statistic as well, as it's widely accepted and used. And the very high range of 0.95 to 1 was the only range that passed the Kvamme gain statistic. I would have liked to have seen kind of a wider range that passed it, but most likely sites to contain, most likely areas to be tested. And then added into a data set. And I think in the future, kind of building a bigger data set, doing that, the results. And then because of the limited size, I had to kind of really zone out on the focus and look at the whole island, whereas regional models would have been better. However, I ran a few models for those, and I just didn't have enough known sites to really create anything of value. In conclusion, the model identified the very highest locations. However, for it to be more practical for use in land management and cultural preservation, further research and development is required. That's my project.
I just heard from Dr. Ebert that he maybe got disconnected. But
Oh,
I think I'm on here now.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that, Eric. So I think it's still recording here, but Zoom just shut down for me and then came up. So I just shut my webcam down here to save on any potential bandwidth here that I can. But
gotcha.
thank you first and foremost. I lost you a little bit at the end, but fortunately I know what your paper is about a little bit more. But any general questions that anyone might have here for Erik? Any generals? Erik, I guess I'll start off with a question that I was thinking a bit about here as well, not only with yours, but with our other speaker, Jim, as well. Can you comment on the role of literature in your research and how that was enabling you to create a stable methodology throughout your capstone experience?
Yeah, the literature was absolutely essential. First, because there's a couple different methods that could be used to build the predictive models. Like I mentioned, there's the Bayesian report approach, or AHP, the analytic hierarchy process. And then I did the logistic regression after I came across the papers by Graves and Woodland. And they kind of just made the most sense to me because they laid out their process really well, which is one of the reasons why I went with the logistic regression. Whereas I was reading some other methods and they just weren't as clear. So the literature is absolutely essential to develop a full understanding of the scope and types of things that can be done with it.
It's often said, thank you, as a commentary to that, in classes and in the capstone experience, and I think this kind of goes for any of us in general, for life and whatnot, when the two best tools to really help us when we're not sure about a particular design, are ultimately is number one, you expand your knowledge base, which goes back to our literature. That's something that is a sort of a prerequisite for everything that we do, not only in capstone, but in other majority of our courses as well, so that we have a foundational understanding. And the second thing that can be a real critical, I guess, asset to us to help determine a good course of action really resides with that of the experience, in the experience of learning, where we become almost an SME or a subject matter expert to some extent in the field that we're working in. And so when we marry the two of those, they become really a 1-2 punch to help us know if we're on the right track.
Yeah.
And as a rule of thumb, there's no research is perfect. Instead, what we're trying to do with the capstone experience is to highlight data, explore data, and analyze it the best that we're able, given the literature and our level of expertise, the time and other considerations that. And so thank you for sharing a little bit about the literature and the role that played in helping shape your design. It's something that's pretty central to the core for everyone going through that experience. Other questions, comments for Erik?
It was great presentation. Great to see all the statistics that you incorporated. I was just wondering if, kind of going into any predictions about how it would turn out and what maybe surprised you, or either about the data or the process or the
a little better results, kind of more accurate.
Mhm.
It's a little frustrating for me. In fact, said you can't really change.
Maybe about trying to include.
Yeah. Really find but much data to work with was tree coverage. So right now, currently, most the tree coverage, because right now has been cut back from when it was first they cut down on pretty much all of them, and so
apologies for folks at home. Right when we need internet, my connection was dropping a bit there, so we temporarily just suspended the recording. And Erik, if you wanted to pick up and briefly continue there where the last question was, to summarize the question and then provide your response to that.
yeah, Greta was asking about the sites and non-sites, about the historical sites being clustered versus random. And I just re-showed the dispersion of them, and then was looking at the non-sites, which you don't really want to be clustered to get an accurate influence, so to say.
And I do apologize again for folks at home. We missed out on several minutes of Q&A there with Erik. It certainly wasn't his fault. That was that of my machine and system here. So apologies to those watching at home. And I would suggest that if anyone is interested in reviewing Erik's paper at its conclusion, to contact me, and I can put you in touch with Erik and share both his work and Jim's, quite frankly. And so, Erik, just as we asked with Jim earlier, could you share or elaborate a little bit on the reflection now at this stage, and going back to the start of the capstone, what this journey has taught you and what it meant to you?
It's definitely taught me to just keep hammering away at the process. Just going at it little bit by little bit, if necessary, just to keep moving forward. I know that's not the most GIS related thing, but was a useful thing to learn these past few months. And yeah, after even the biggest projects can be manageable if you just take them little bit by little bit.
Oftentimes this experience is not one of an academic journey, it's one of a personal journey. And that's something I hope that both Erik, both you and Jim, and certainly other folks who have been through that journey or are considering going on that journey can hopefully recognize, is that we learn a lot about ourselves and how we can learn and how we can overcome things in life. To keep learning and growing is one of the key mission-oriented aspects of the school, is lifelong learning and contributing to your field. And a lot of that comes from within. And so we find a lot about ourselves, I guess, in the end, through that journey, not only in Capstone, but through that entire process. So with that, Erik, on behalf of the rest of our faculty, some of which of our main core faculty here, Ms. Poser, and the rest of our other adjunct faculty as well, who weren't able to make it tonight, we'd like to extend a warm congratulations to you as well on the accomplishment and defense and closure of your capstone research presentation here. So I give Erik another round of applause there.
Thank you.
You only hear me clapping, but there are a lot of others clapping for both of you as well, Erik and Jim. So a big congratulations to you. And once again, my apologies for folks at home where we lost quite a lot of rich Q&A discussion with Erik here. So if folks are interested in learning more about Erik's capstone paper, please let me know. Again, provide that to you. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. And again, as a reminder, if anybody would like the YouTube link version for this, please reach out and let me know, and we'll be able to share that out with folks. So congratulations again to you both.
Thank you.